Just quickly before we get into this review, I am very excited to let you know that my new book, The Art and Making of Fantasy Miniatures, is out now. The book is a showcase of over 1,000 professionally painted fantasy miniatures and artworks accompanied by commentary from the creators and designers. It's available from all major online booksellers, and I'm sure your local game store or bookstore can also order it for you. But I'll put a link in the description that will take you to a page with direct links to where you can order the book from all online sellers worldwide. So if this seems like the sort of book that you or someone you know may enjoy, definitely check it out, and even if you can help spread the word, I absolutely appreciate it. This is a review of The Art of Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Now, if for some reason you've found yourself watching this video and you're thinking, "Ugh, Phantom Menace, I hate that nonsense," well, not so fast, friend. Regardless of what you think of the movie, there is no denying that the art produced for it is incredible. I mean, amazing art and design is really a hallmark of Star Wars in any of its incarnations. So I definitely encourage an open mind when looking at this book, as otherwise you may be missing out on some really cool Star Wars art. If you're like me, however, and you actually like Phantom Menace, then you're going to have a really good time because this book is just fantastic. And I just want to start by giving some context to the book, as I feel like it's a really special art book in the sort of history of film art books. Because as far as I'm aware, the very first true art book for a movie was The Art of Star Wars, which came out in 1979. Empire and Jedi also had art books, all of which I reviewed previously. But between the release of those books and the 90s, art books really didn't take off. Occasionally there were behind-the-scenes books for movies that featured concept art, but they were mostly pretty bad, just glorified magazines. It wasn't until Disney started producing big, high-quality art books for their animated movies in the 90s, but it was really only animated movies that were getting this sort of treatment. Even something like the art book for Mars Attacks, which came out in 96, I think, and was actually pretty good, but it still read more like an art and making of book rather than just a true art book. And so I think this Phantom Menace book was the first time for a live-action movie since the original trilogy that took spectacular art on its own and presented it in a substantial, serious way that made fans and publishers and studios sit up and pay attention. Of course, this could easily have been an isolated incident and fizzled out, but thankfully it was followed not only by amazing art books for episodes 2 and 3, but also art books for like the Lord of the Rings films. And interestingly, and somewhat amusingly, those years also coincide with a huge drop in the quality of Disney's art books for their movies. And it's kind of surprising because you might think that now that this book's 20 years old, maybe it's a little more primitive than the movie art books we currently have, but no way. If anything, this book is actually still better than 90% of art books released today. I think a major contributing factor that makes the prequel art books and the Lord of the Rings ones so good is because beyond having amazing artists, the art was given real priority and huge development periods. So many art books, even when they have great art, feel sparse or underwhelming. But for both Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, they had 4, 5+ years of working on visual development, which is really atypical for Hollywood. And so they were able to generate such large quantities of art, but also high quality, and so are then able to produce substantial, beautiful art books. Also atypical was the fact that the art department was working while the script was being written, so the script and art were influencing one another, changing and evolving together. And I think that leads me to my absolute favorite thing about the curation of this book, that the major focus of the book is on the exploration of the designs. It's crazy how many art books completely neglect to do this and just show basically the final designs. But in this book, the vast majority of the art is showing early, alternate and abandoned ideas. And I really appreciate that fascinating sense of evolution and development, and also it's just really cool to be able to see stuff that never made it into the movie, which is why I adore this book so much and find it has real value and interest. There's probably more black and white art than I would usually like, but thankfully there's just something about the way that Doug Chiang, whose art makes up most of the book, the way he shades his drawings and renders them in such detail that it actually seems really polished. Even though when you look closer you can see the more sketchy elements, but it just looks so much more illustrative than most black and white stuff. Literally my only complaint about this book is that maybe as much as 50% of the sizing and layout is not very good. Occasionally there are some images where the layout is downright moronic. There are more than a few instances where images are bizarrely and unnecessarily small thumbnails. Some models and drawings and things so small that you can't even really tell what it is, let alone appreciate the detail. For example, there are some especially bad instances where you get a 2-page spread where one image is taking up 90% of the spread, and then you'll have another image about 1/8 that size cramped down the bottom. And it's like, you didn't think that was a little stupid? You really couldn't have sized those a little more appropriately? But ultimately, this is all just a slight annoyance rather than a serious issue. As for the text, it is brilliant. There's not a lot, but what it lacks in quantity, it makes up for in quality. Mostly it's just, on average, I'd say 2 or 3 sentences per spread, but it's really good, really interesting information. Insightful, behind-the-scenes facts that very much supports that focus on the origins, inspirations, exploration, and changes to the designs as they evolved. Now, if you like what you've seen in this video and you want to go look on eBay for a copy, be very careful. There are 2 versions of this book. The full version that we've been looking at here, and a 44-page version that was released as part of a VHS collector's edition or something. They have very similar covers, but the way you can tell is that the smaller version has the Naboo starfighter on the cover, as well as text at the bottom saying it's an excerpt, which you definitely don't want. You want this proper full version, which has the pod racer on the cover. In terms of further reading, there are obviously a billion books on Star Wars, a number of which I've reviewed previously, and so you can follow this link to my Star Wars book playlist and check some of those out.